Robert is 72, and he has eaten 2 eggs most mornings for about 40 years. For a long stretch of that time, he was told the yolks were dangerous. Cholesterol, heart disease, cut back. Then the advice seemed to reverse. Eggs came back, and he started hearing they were nearly a perfect food. Now he opens his phone and sees one headline saying, "Eggs protect muscle and brain health as you age." Directly underneath it, another says the cholesterol is bad for his heart. Same food. Opposite advice, both stated with complete confidence. So Robert wants one simple answer. Should he keep eating eggs or stop? Here's the honest version, and I'll give it to you right now rather than at minute 20. After 60, what matters isn't just the egg. It's the egg. What comes on the plate with it, what the rest of your diet looks like, and how your particular body responds. That's the whole answer. Now let me show you why it's true, because each piece of it is genuinely interesting. An egg can absolutely be part of a very healthy breakfast. That exact same egg can also sit inside a breakfast that pushes the whole meal in a considerably worse direction. And separately from both of those, for some people, the cholesterol in the yolk really can nudge their LDL upward. All 3 of those things are true at once. That's why the advice keeps seeming to contradict itself. And the first thing worth understanding is why eggs became such an argument in the first place. The story starts with a genuinely reasonable idea that turned out to be incomplete. An egg yolk contains a meaningful amount of cholesterol. Roughly 200 milligrams in a large egg, give or take. Almost all of it is in the yolk. The white contains protein and essentially no cholesterol. Now, for decades, the model people used was beautifully simple. Cholesterol in your food becomes cholesterol in your blood, becomes cholesterol in your arteries. 3 steps, easy to picture, easy to put on a poster. And I want to be fair to that idea, because it wasn't stupid. It was the logical first guess. We knew arteries develop plaque containing cholesterol. We knew eggs contain cholesterol. Connecting those two seemed obvious. But there was a missing step in the middle, and it turns out to be the important one. Your liver is not a passive pipe that dietary cholesterol simply flows through. Your liver manufactures cholesterol. Quite a lot of it, every single day. In fact, most of the cholesterol circulating in your blood was made by your own body, not eaten. Your body needs cholesterol. It's a structural component of every cell membrane you own. It's also a building block for hormones, for vitamin D, and for bile acids. This is not a poison your body is trying to keep out. It's a material your body actively produces because it requires it. And here's the part that changes the whole picture. When you eat more cholesterol, your liver tends to make somewhat less. There's a regulatory response built into the system. That's the missing step. Not a pipe, a system with feedback. So the simple 3-step poster was wrong, or at least badly incomplete. But now I have to be careful, because this is exactly where a lot of content overcorrects and goes wrong in the opposite direction. You will hear people say that eating cholesterol simply doesn't raise your blood cholesterol. Full stop, case closed. That is also not accurate, and I'm not going to tell you it is. Randomized trials, where researchers actually feed people different amounts of eggs and measure their blood, have generally found that higher egg intake does raise LDL cholesterol on average. The average effect tends to be modest. But it isn't zero, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Here's the more accurate version. Your body regulates cholesterol. But that regulation is not identical in every person. Some people can eat several eggs a day and see very little change in their blood lipids. Other people show a clearly larger response to the same amount. You'll see internet labels for these groups, and I'm going to avoid them, because they get used as though they were formal diagnoses that a doctor assigns you. They aren't. The useful takeaway is simpler. There is real variation between individuals, and the average result in a study does not tell you what happens in you. Hold on to that. It'll matter later when people start demanding a universal number of eggs. And there's one more reason the guidance itself shifted, which is worth knowing. For years, American dietary guidance carried a specific daily limit on dietary cholesterol, 300 milligrams. That numerical cap was eventually dropped, and people online often report this as proof that cholesterol in food stopped mattering. That is not what happened. The committee concluded the evidence wasn't strong enough to support that particular number as a hard limit. The advice that replaced it was to keep dietary cholesterol intake as low as practical within a healthy eating pattern. Removing a specific number is not the same as declaring something irrelevant. Those got confused, and the confusion is still circulating. Now let's set cholesterol aside for a few minutes, because there's a reason eggs never actually went away. Whatever the argument about cholesterol, an egg is a genuinely nutrient-dense food, and that part isn't controversial. Start with protein. An egg provides high-quality protein containing all the essential amino acids in a well-balanced pattern. It's one of the reference proteins nutrition researchers actually compare other foods against. Then there's choline, which eggs are one of the better dietary sources of. Choline matters for cell membranes. It's also involved in making acetylcholine a neurotransmitter. Now, you'll see that fact turned into headlines about eggs and memory or dementia prevention. I'd be careful with that. Choline being involved in brain chemistry is not the same as eggs being a proven strategy for protecting your memory. Those are two very different claims, and only one of them is supported. Eggs also provide vitamin B12, which matters more with age because absorption can decline over the years. They contain selenium, some vitamin A, riboflavin, and a modest amount of vitamin D, though the vitamin D amount varies with how the hen was fed. And in the yolk specifically, there's lutein and zeaxanthin. These are carotenoids that concentrate in the macula, the central part of your retina. There's a small randomized study worth mentioning here, done in adults over 60. Participants ate 1 egg a day for 5 weeks, and their circulating lutein and zeaxanthin increased. In that particular study, total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides did not change significantly. That's interesting. It is also small and short. 5 weeks is not 5 years. And one small trial is not a general rule for every older adult. And it certainly doesn't mean eggs prevent macular degeneration. It means the yolk can contribute those compounds, and they showed up in the bloodstream. So here's the honest summary of the nutrition side. Eggs can contribute useful nutrients inside a larger diet. That's the correct sentence. Not eggs prevent dementia. Not eggs protect your eyes. And not eggs build muscle. And notice that none of this cancels the cholesterol question. Both things exist in the same food at the same time. If you appreciate explanations that hold two true things side by side instead of picking a side, subscribing helps this channel reach more people. So let's go back to cholesterol and get properly into the mechanism, because this is where most of the confusion actually lives. When your doctor tells you your LDL cholesterol is high, what is actually being measured? Not cholesterol floating loose in your blood. That doesn't happen because cholesterol is a fatty substance and blood is water-based. Here's the picture that helps. Think of cholesterol as cargo, and lipoproteins as the vehicles that carry it. LDL is one of those vehicles. Low-density lipoprotein. When your lab report says LDL cholesterol, it's essentially estimating how much cholesterol is being carried in that particular class of vehicle. So LDL isn't a type of cholesterol. It's a transport particle, and cholesterol is what it's hauling. Why does that distinction matter for the egg question? Because it explains why swallowing cholesterol is not the same as pouring that cholesterol directly into an artery. The dietary cholesterol first has to be absorbed, and absorption itself varies between people. It travels to the liver. The liver adjusts its own production. Then it packages and dispatches lipoproteins back into circulation. There's a whole regulated system between your fork and your bloodstream. But, and this is the balance point of the entire video, a regulated system is not an infinitely absorbing one. Push enough dietary cholesterol into it, in some people, and LDL does move. So we have two findings that sound like they contradict each other. Randomized feeding trials. Higher egg intake raises LDL modestly on average. Large observational studies of people's actual eating habits. Moderate egg intake generally shows no clear association with cardiovascular disease. How can both be true? This is worth understanding, because it explains a lot of confusing nutrition news. Those two study designs are answering genuinely different questions. A feeding trial asks one thing. If I change this single food for a few weeks, what happens to this blood marker? A cohort study asks, over decades, do people who habitually eat this food have more heart attacks and strokes? Related questions, not the same question. A food can modestly move a risk marker without producing a simple one food, one disease relationship at the population level. Because cardiovascular risk isn't determined by one marker or one food. It depends on LDL exposure accumulated over years, on blood pressure, on smoking, on diabetes, on body composition, on physical activity, on genetics, and on the entire rest of the diet. An egg is one input into a system with dozens of them. There's also a practical reason cohort studies are hard here, and it's worth naming. Researchers can't randomly assign people to eat eggs for 30 years, so they observe what people already do. And what people already do comes bundled with everything else about them: their whole diet, their income, their activity, their other habits. Now, let me show you the actual numbers from the largest analysis, because the details are genuinely interesting. A study published in the BMJ in 2020 combined 3 large American cohorts, over 200,000 people, followed for up to 32 years. Eating at least 1 egg per day was not associated with increased cardiovascular disease risk after adjusting for lifestyle and dietary factors. The researchers also ran an updated meta-analysis pooling 33 risk estimates covering more than 1.5 million people. An increase of 1 egg per day was not associated with cardiovascular disease risk there either. So that sounds fairly settled, but I want to point out 2 things in that same paper that most summaries skip. First, the people eating more eggs also had higher body mass index, ate more red meat, and were less likely to be taking statins. Think about what that means. Higher egg intake traveled together with other things. Untangling them statistically is difficult, and that's a genuine limitation. Second, the heterogeneity across those studies was substantial. The individual studies did not all agree with each other, and there are studies pointing the other way. One analysis found that an additional half egg per day was associated with a modest increase in cardiovascular risk. Recent umbrella reviews of reviews, describe this whole literature as heterogeneous, with weak certainty for many of the associations. I'm telling you this because I think you deserve the actual state of the evidence, not a confident soundbite. What the evidence does not support is a universal message that older adults must avoid eggs. What it also does not support is declaring eggs risk-free for everyone, regardless of their situation. And that first detail from the BMJ study, that egg eaters also ate more red meat, points directly at the most practical thing in this entire video. So let's put 2 breakfasts on the table. Both belong to Robert. Both contain exactly 2 eggs, same amount of cholesterol from the eggs. The first is what Robert actually eats: 2 eggs fried in butter, 2 strips of bacon, a sausage patty, white toast with more butter, coffee. The second is the same 2 eggs, cooked with a little olive oil, sautéed peppers and onions or spinach alongside, whole grain toast, a piece of fruit. Now here's the question that matters. If Robert's LDL comes back high, is the cholesterol in those 2 eggs really the main thing on that plate? Look at what else is in breakfast number 1. Butter, bacon, and sausage together contribute a substantial amount of saturated fat. And saturated fat has a well-established effect on LDL cholesterol, better established, in fact, than the effect of dietary cholesterol itself. The bacon and sausage are processed meat, which carries its own cardiovascular concerns in the research beyond just fat content. There's a significant amount of sodium in that meal, relevant to blood pressure. The refined white toast contributes very little fiber. And fiber is one of the things that actually helps with cholesterol. And the whole plate contains almost no vegetables or fruit. Now count how many separate cardiovascular concerns are sitting on breakfast number 1. The eggs are arguably not at the top of that list. Here's what happens in real kitchens, and I think it's the most useful observation in this video. Someone gets a concerning cholesterol result. They decide to be responsible about it. So they cut out the eggs. The bacon stays, the sausage stays, the butter stays, the white toast stays. They removed the food they'd been taught to blame and left most of the actual pattern completely intact. The egg is easy to blame because it arrives in its own shell with a name. The rest of the breakfast hides in plain sight. I'm not claiming breakfast number 2 is perfect, or that it makes anyone bulletproof. The point is narrower and more useful. Those 2 meals are not nutritionally similar just because both contain eggs. 2 eggs is a constant in that comparison. Almost everything else changed. So when someone asks whether eggs are healthy, the honest response is another question. Eaten with what? Now let's talk about why eggs can genuinely be useful after 60, because there's a real argument here. Protein becomes more practically important with age, and the reason is functional rather than abstract. Preserving muscle affects standing up from a chair, walking, balance, recovering from an illness or a hospital stay, and staying independent. And 2 things tend to work against older adults on protein. Appetite often declines somewhat, and older muscle tends to respond less efficiently to a given amount of protein than younger muscle does. So protein intake matters, and many older adults get less of it than would be ideal, particularly at breakfast. That's often the smallest and most carbohydrate-heavy meal of the day. Eggs fit into that gap unusually well, for reasons that have nothing to do with being magical. They're inexpensive, they're quick. They keep for weeks, and they require no cooking skill. They're soft and easy to chew, which genuinely matters for people with dental problems. And the protein quality is excellent. But let's be accurate about the quantity, because this gets oversold constantly. One large egg contains roughly 6 grams of protein. 2 eggs, roughly 12. That's a useful contribution. It is not by itself a high-protein meal for most older adults. So the honest framing is this: eggs can contribute to adequate protein intake. They are not magic muscle food. And nothing here means eggs prevent muscle loss. Preserving muscle depends far more on using it than on any single food. If Robert needs more protein overall, the answer involves his whole day, not just breakfast. Dairy, fish, poultry, legumes, tofu, lean meat, eggs, whatever he'll actually eat consistently. I'm deliberately not giving you a grams per day target, because the right amount depends on body size, kidney function, and medical conditions. And that's a conversation for your doctor or a dietitian. And here's the important balance. A good healthy aging argument for eggs does not erase the lipid discussion. Both considerations are real at the same time. That's the whole theme of this video. Which brings us to the question everybody actually wants answered. How many eggs? And I'm going to disappoint you slightly, because I don't think an honest universal number exists. You'll find confident answers everywhere. 1 a day, never more than 3 a week. 2 a day is fine. 7 a week is the sweet spot. Every one of those numbers is being stated with more certainty than the evidence supports. Here's why a single number can't work. People differ in their baseline LDL and in their genetics. They differ in how much saturated fat the rest of their diet already contains, in whether they have diabetes, in whether they have existing cardiovascular disease, in their calorie needs, their protein needs, and simply what they'll actually eat. A 70-year-old with favorable blood lipids, no cardiovascular disease, and a diet full of vegetables, fish, and whole grains is not the same case as someone with very high LDL and established heart disease. Giving both of those people the same egg number would be false precision dressed up as advice. What major cardiovascular guidance generally does is allow eggs within a healthy overall dietary pattern for many people, while advising more caution for those with abnormal lipids or higher cardiovascular risk. Notice the shape of that. It's conditional, it depends on the person. That's not the guidance being wishy-washy. That's the guidance being accurate about a question that genuinely has different answers for different people. So who should think about this more carefully? This deserves more individual attention if your LDL cholesterol is already high. It deserves attention if you've been told your cholesterol needs managing, whatever the specific numbers were. If you have known cardiovascular disease, if you've had a heart attack, a stent, or bypass surgery, if you have familial hypercholesterolemia, or a strong family history of early heart disease or very high cholesterol, if you have diabetes or several cardiovascular risk factors together, if your diet is already high in saturated fat, or if your eggs routinely arrive alongside bacon, sausage, and butter, which brings us back to the plate. Now, I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying eggs are forbidden for these groups. I'm saying these are the situations where the answer becomes individual rather than general, and where a video is the wrong place to get it. And if you do change your egg intake because you're concerned about cholesterol, the useful feedback isn't an internet argument. It's your actual lipid panel, interpreted by your clinician alongside everything else about you. One caution on that, though. Don't start testing yourself constantly and attributing every fluctuation to what you ate last week. Cholesterol levels move for many reasons. A single reading doesn't isolate the effect of one food, and treating it that way leads people in circles. And nothing here is a reason to change or stop a statin or any other prescribed medication. That decision belongs with the person who prescribed it. Let's touch on a few mistakes, because they follow directly from everything we've covered. The first is treating eggs as either poison or medicine. They're food. Nutrient-dense food, containing both useful nutrients and dietary cholesterol. The second is doing exactly what we described earlier, scrutinizing the egg while ignoring the rest of the breakfast entirely. The third is eating only egg whites out of general fear of the yolk. There's an important nuance here. If your clinician has specifically advised you to reduce dietary cholesterol, following that advice makes sense, and egg whites are a reasonable tool. But if you're avoiding yolks purely because you absorbed a message in 1985, it's worth knowing what you're leaving out. The yolk contains essentially all of the egg's choline, the lutein and zeaxanthin, most of the vitamins, and the fat. The white is mostly protein and water. So the yolk is where most of the nutrition lives, and also where the cholesterol lives, both in the same place. That's inconvenient. And it's exactly why this question doesn't resolve into a clean rule. You can't separate the part you want from the part you're worried about. They came in the same package. The fourth mistake is assuming 2 eggs automatically make it a high-protein meal. 12 grams is a start, not a finish. And the fifth is treating a single headline as settled science, especially observational headlines, which report associations rather than proving causes. If a study finds people who eat more of something have more of some disease, that's a starting point for investigation, not a verdict. So let's come back to Robert. And what actually changes for him? He does not throw out his eggs. That was never where this was going. What changes is the question he's asking. He stops asking whether eggs are good or bad. He starts asking what his whole breakfast is doing. And when he looks at it that way, the answer is fairly obvious to him. He keeps the 2 eggs. He cooks them with a little olive oil instead of a large amount of butter. The bacon and sausage become an occasional thing rather than a daily one. And that's the change that likely matters most on his plate. The white toast becomes whole grain. He adds some sautéed vegetables, or a piece of fruit, or both. The coffee stays exactly as it is, because the coffee was never part of this conversation. And separately, he mentions the whole thing at his next appointment, along with his most recent lipid panel. If his doctor tells him his LDL warrants reducing dietary cholesterol specifically, then he adjusts. Maybe 1 yolk and 1 white, maybe fewer egg days. But that's a decision made with actual information about Robert, not a rule he found online. Notice what happened there. He didn't get a simpler answer, he got a better question. And that shift is worth more than any egg count because it transfers. The same reasoning applies to butter, to red meat, to bread, to almost every food that gets declared good or bad in rotation. Ask what the whole meal is doing. Ask what the whole week looks like. Ask how your own body actually responds. Those 3 questions survive the next headline cycle. A number does not. So are eggs still healthy after 60? An egg is not a heart attack in a shell. It's also not a miracle food, and it never was. It's a nutrient-dense food that contains genuinely useful protein and micronutrients, and also contains dietary cholesterol. For many people, it fits comfortably inside a healthy diet, and the large cohort data is reasonably reassuring on that point. For some people, higher LDL, existing cardiovascular disease, inherited lipid disorders, the decision carries more weight and deserves individual attention. And for almost everyone after 60, what surrounds the egg on that plate may matter as much as the egg itself. So what actually matters isn't the egg count. It's your whole breakfast, your whole dietary pattern, and your own actual health profile. Those 3 things will tell you far more than any headline ever will.